Liam Kumar Day effect. Not really happened.
Nigel couldn't make it.
Yeah.
I remember Norley said he could make
Don't
it.
dig this hole. Phil, credit to the guy. He always manages to do well what he has, but he is a shocking person now. You guys got a trophy? No.
It was pre-Viv.
Nah, my life from Rashad Mendon.
Right, you go. I'm a tag, Jack! I'm a fucking tag!
Hello and welcome to another episode of the LOC Report. We're back after a few weeks off, I think, but of course we had to make it back for the playoffs and what may possibly be an LOC first. It's hard to remember because we did have Phil abroad and Viv has obviously been here, there and ever over the past year, but this may be the first Inter-Continental podcast. Pretty sure it's definitely the first Inter-Continental Wildcard Bowl, as resident co-host Chris Leach is coming to you live from a hotel room in and around Washington, D.C. How's it going, Chris?
Correct, yes, all good, thanks, yeah. I'm broadcasting live from the nation's capital.
And audio is true broadcast mode today as well. Yes, that nation's capital, yes.
Which, is probably more appropriate, but yeah, definitely here, having a good time, and yeah, say on the ground to watch the playoffs later on, which is going to be really interesting.
Yes, excellent. No spoilers before we get to it, but yes, you are in a good location for what's going to unfold. And yeah, without further ado, we'll get straight to it. We're obviously not going to recap sort of what's happened over the whole period of this go away, but we're obviously going to start with recapping what happened in week 14 and then how that's unfolded into the final playoff picture, which we now have. So let's get to it. Let's do the recaps. So we did not have a pod for the last couple of weeks, as we know, so no official marquee matchup. However, if we did pick one, the playoff race really all centered around the Portsmouth division. The Winchester division was already sewn up by my dad the week before, and none of the other teams there, I think, had a realistic shot at the playoffs. I think it was really only the points forward wildcard any of them could have actually got, of which none of them were really in any position to compete for that. The Southampton division, there was some jeopardy there, but there were three teams entering, or going into week 14 that could actually, any one of them could have won the division, let alone potentially a couple of them or more making playoffs. We'll start with, what probably was the epicenter of the playoff race, shall we say, Chris, with the Dream Team against Bucking the Trend, because this game was extremely interesting. Given the points advantage by Bucking the Trend entering this one, a simple win would have quite very possibly given him a division win, depending what happens in the Pakistan Exxon game and some points. For Viv, he was leading the division entering this, ahead of Bucking the Trent and Pakistan, who are both at 8-5 entering this one. A win for both of them could have actually even resulted in a scenario where Viv was knocked out of playoffs entirely. And it was an absolute nail-biter of the game as it happened. 96-93 to the Dream Teams. The Dream Team are not only at risk of missing out, but actually seals the number one overall seed with this win, because they were the only 9-win team entering this weekend. So a win guaranteed them the division, the first round bye, the regular season championship, the Nathwani rule, and all of that. The win they did just get by 3 points, but the story of it, Chris, and we'll go through the points of the players in a bit, but it was the decision by Mike, really, as he'd mentioned in the chat, to I say decision, the error perhaps, to play Calvin Austin over Amari Cooper, which he said he realised he didn't have on his team. That one change not only would have led Mike to win the game, Chris, he would also have won the division, had a bye, would have knocked Viv potentially out of the playoffs entirely, or perhaps into the wildcard spot. Mightily close game, exciting points on either side, and it was a heavy bye week for Viv as well, so this wasn't necessarily an easy week for him, but he came through with the win. Chris, what do you make of the game?
Yes, indeed. To say it's a heartbreaker for Mike, but yeah, you're right, and I think this is a twofold thing really. Is that Mike's team's been at quarterback anyway for most of the year pretty inconsistent.
Yeah.
You see some really depressed figures there for both Mahomes and for Geno Smith, but you're right. I think playing somebody like Calvin Austin in a game like this on the line, yeah, there's been some reasonable performances over the last couple of weeks. But for me, when you've got somebody who is on a bit of a home run team in what was a shootout, I know it's difficult to say in hindsight. It's 2020, of course, but I think I'd have played Amari Cooper over him as well. And say it's a weird one. What do you do with Chase Brown in such good form as well? He's on the bench and goes for 18. So it's a very difficult situation, I think, there. But yeah, it's one that Mike will no doubt rue. But on the other side, yes, a bye heavy week. Clearly, when you look at the bench there.
Yeah.
But some spot starts came good. Purdy came good in this matchup anyway. With 26 points. We got touchdowns across the board. From Hopkins, Harris, Dunze. Jason Myers kicks for 12, which again, as a spot start for the week, worked out really well. Garrett Wilson goes for 114 yards again. And that hasn't been the case necessarily all year, so it's been a bit of perfect storm there for Viv, where yes, Lamar and Brian Robinson obviously aren't in that team, but yeah, that's what made all the difference. And again, it's good spot starts as to bad spot starts in this one. I think Bucky Irving going down again wasn't necessarily the best thing.
Yeah.
Again for Mike, because he's been in great form over the last 3 weeks, especially on the side of their bye. So you'd expect to see more points there, and it didn't help. So yeah, unfortunate for Mike, unlucky, not necessarily self-inflicted, but mainly. And Viv rolls on, which yeah, you have to say, over the course of the season with that record, he's deserved.
Yep, no, absolutely, and he does comment in the chat here as well. You picking up Chris Jameson Williams actually prevented Viv from playing him, which he would have lost it. He had done so. Instead he plays Roma Dunze, who gets the 2 touchdowns and the reasonably decent score on the day. So butterfly effects everywhere in this one. It's the second straight year that Viv has faced a team with Amari Cooper on the bench and escaped because he was on the bench. So some very interesting narratives within that. The loss itself did not completely knock Mike out of the playoff chances, I don't believe, so we'll have to see what happened elsewhere. But obviously it was a winning-in scenario effectively for Mike, so bitterly disappointing, as you say. He went very heavy on the Bucks, somewhat unfortunate with Chase McLaughlin, I think, against the Raiders, because they bled points to kickers all year, and as you say, Bucky Irving as well, who game time decision entering the game, and yeah, unfortunately they sort of just lightened his workload. And it cost him. Unfortunately, so the history of this matchup all time, it's now 3-5 in favour of the Dream Team. We'll go on to we'll tidy up with the Winchester Division games quickly, as I say. None of these had any playoff ramifications. We did obviously have a playoff team feature in one of these, Ben Estes against Great Scott. And Ben Estes flexing their muscles going into the playoffs with the bye, 140-81 over Great Scott. Giving my dad a 9-5 record and dropping Great Scott to 9-8. Obviously, as we know, the big story of this one was Josh Allen going for 58, which coming in week 14, Friday week of the regular season, is the new season high single player score that we've had in the league this year, Chris.
Yeah, I mean, so we don't see high 50s very often. I think over the course of the entirety of the league, this is now.
There's only been a few, a couple. Now. I think there was a 60-pointer I was checking earlier when I was just doing some other stuff. In fact, I've got the accolades here. Which was Peyton Manning in his ridiculous year. But outside of that, that is actually the third highest score. We also had Drew Brees go for 58 one year, so it's up there though.
It's certainly up there, and say for QB scores, you don't see those very often. So 140 points is warranted, but that's not the entirety of the story there. Obviously, we see some really good scores, especially for the skill positions. You look for Adams Kittle particularly, 151 yards on the day. And Njoku getting in there, necessary because obviously look at the bench and you lose even with Henry and Mixon not being in this team, it still scores 140 points. which is frightening. But yeah, Montgomery, Watson came up okay on his yardage as well, and decent from the Saints D too. So again, I think that Dave's really got this nailed this year. Even the strength and depth on this particular week is good, but when you've got a player like Josh Allen who can go and score crazy points any given time, that's huge. Unfortunately for Jeff, he carries a player in this one, which is never something I say. You see very rarely do you ever see Cooper Kupp on the bench. Wow. Anyway, he's there, and he shouldn't be. But there you are. So this team's been up and down all year. I think 6-8 is a warranted record after this amount of time. But yeah, any team which had the level of injuries that they have. Obviously, Pacheco's not been there for most of the season. Evans had his time out. Murray the same. It's naturally going to feel that way. Obviously, Breece Hall out on the day as well on the bench. So yeah, it's an up and down season. 81 points, shame. But yeah, Juwan Jennings there showing what he can do with his big 21 on the day, which is good. And lest we forget as well, Tyrone Tracy. Big spot start, big one off the waivers, and he's done well for him in the time that he's been there.
Yeah, absolutely. And you must not escape this game without me playing the buzzsaw that went directly through Jeff's chest, specifically courtesy of Josh Allen. So that record brings it to 2-2 between Ben Estes and Greg Scott. And then the other Winchester game, which very much just for fun, or I suppose Freddie attempting to decisively avoid last place. But Ross actually turns up with 131 and nowhere against Freddie Oakland Bears, who he actually had a decent score, certainly by his team standards this year, with the 95-2. So yeah, these two having a little bit of fun on the final week of the season. Zach Charbonnet very much benefiting or assisting Ross, because he would have won even still without that, but that's what makes the margin absolutely what it is. And JJ telling out, I didn't realise Justin Jefferson hasn't scored a touchdown in like 8 weeks or something ridiculous until this week. I had no idea that was even a thing. He must have been getting yards, because I've not seen anything saying how much of a bust or whatever he's been. But to go that stretch without a touchdown, crazy. But Ross gets the win here as well. Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, Ross doing well here. And again, big players in this team coming up trumps. Obviously, Burrow and Jefferson equate 55 of that. But yeah, it's a big score from Charbonnet as well, which makes me very sad as the Kenneth Walker owner that he just can't stay fit this year. Otherwise, those points would have been mine. But yes, it's indicative. I think probably the season is that Ross done 25 points off the defense and special teams there as well, which is pretty good. Yeah, it's just up and down. I mean, say he can get to 6-8 actually with the team that he had. It's been pretty good, and obviously we saw we've seen it a bit of a wild ride, and it's been anchored by Burrow most of the year as well. But that's not to say that this has been a bad team this year. Actually, by coming to the draft and doing it, it's worked. Yeah, there you go. They carry on doing it. Whilst for Freddie, again picked up Guerrero with one game to go, which snookered a lot of people, I think. But fair play. It's carried him to 95 points. Good score this week. Good kicker and D score. Again, throughout the course of the year, just the skill positions just weren't there. But again, playing the QB roulette as well. Justin Herbert in there this week again. A down week, or at least a depressed week for him. But Darnell Mooney, I think, let me just mention him as an underrated receiver. He has some weeks he goes for big score, some weeks he goes for nothing, but you don't know what you're going to get. But actually, played in the right week this week, 142 yards, fair play. So yeah, I say the 4-10 record. It's year one. Now you know how we operate, how to do it next year. I'm sure there'll be a big improvement. Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, exactly. The history of this game between these two is now we got Freddie up here. I would 2-0 in favour of Ross. So Ross picking up both the games over Freddie as they shared the division this year. We'll go into the Southampton division, and again we'll start off because the other two games from here will be playoff implication games. This one didn't really have any playoff implication games. It's the Podcast Bowl. We didn't get to preview or recap, I think, the first Podcast Bowl because we just had a couple of bye weeks there or whatever. But we finished off with recapping this one, and it was a bit of a ding-dong, Chris. And in my quest to close out the year at 500 against division opponents, nearly pulled it off, if not for Jamar Chase going bananas to squeak a 99 to 96 point victory for your team, Chris. You'd almost pretty much virtually made playoffs with this. You buy the points forward wild card with my dad winning the division already. That comfortably left that pretty much in your hands only. And yet you delivered another solid performance here. Just pipping my team to the finish line, basically.
Yeah, I was worried in this one, I have to say, because for such a long time I was behind in the game, and I didn't think that I had any chance to be able to win this one. But yeah, as you mentioned, Jamar Chase comes out of nowhere on Monday Night Football and comes up with a big 31-point score to get across the line. But yeah, the worrying trend is that there are certain key skill positions in the middle of my team that isn't scoring touchdowns as regularly as they perhaps were at the beginning of the season. Certainly the Kamara, Gibbs, Walker trifecta has fallen apart because Walker cannot stay fit.
Yeah.
It's now turned into the Kamara and Gibbs double with Chase, and in this one both Myers and Bowers against Tampa, but that didn't quite work out because of QBs going down with injury in that game, which is a shame. But come out with 98 points, can't really complain. I've got a much wider bench now for the playoffs, which is good. So we'll see how that goes. But for you, I say you should be quite pleased with that. I think the points on the board scored was pretty good. I don't think in the world you were gonna in this game you were gonna play Thielen, which would have taken you across the line. Would you have played Sincere McCormick? Probably, I don't know. It's only you can answer that one, really. But
it would have been DJ Moritz, where they were both entering the game injured, and where they kicked off later, there was a timing thing, and it's those two that as you kind of allude to, Thielen or McCormick would have effectively won me the game if I played either of them over just one of those two. But I mean, as you kind of say, while Thielen's been doing reasonably well, tough matchup entering it, and McCormick's was still a bit of an unknown quantity entering this one against two fairly established OBC players in the Bears offense, Grant. And I was a bit surprised by the Bears because you think after firing Eberflus, there might be a little bit of a bounce, but they just got completely creamed by the Niners.
Yeah, quite. They've laid down and rolled around. So yes, unfortunately. But yeah, your three big players in your given quarterback for the week, which is Matt Stafford, and that shootout did all right. And then obviously Hill and Dowdle did well too, with a decent score. Kicker and D, Braydown did okay. So I think again, if there are a few more of these across the course of the year, your outlook might be a bit better.
We'll come to in the standings and stats because we have the full breakdown over everything, all the other metrics we have, which kind of indicate how well you sort of did across the season, independent of your record. Like I said, there was decisively, I think, a couple of absolute bottom out weeks, which kind of completely handicapped me regarding because the rest of the season. Not to say that my team was a playoff team, because there was a number of draftings that just didn't go the right way, injuries and stuff, long-term injuries and things that held me back. But even despite that, as you say, the team's been fairly good to end the year, and in another world, could this team have actually maybe been at least in the race to the end of the season? Probably, but it didn't go that way, as we know. But yeah, at least finishing the season in a fairly nicely way. even if I didn't get the win in the final game of the season. It's a nice thing to see. But yes, absolutely. Your team rolls on to the next round in the Wildcard Bowl. We will see who you'll face across the other matchups here. In the history of this one, I think you just take the lead now. 13-12 all time against my team. So we will go to the other Southampton division game. Which actually was a showdown for the division, effectively, against Make Kitchens Great Again and Tom's Tyrants. With the win, Tom's Tyrants would have won the division, potentially even knocked Make Kitchens Great Again out of the playoffs. Without a win, Tom's Tyrants effectively misses the playoffs, and it obviously would mean that Make Kitchens Great Again secures the division in a bye and punches their ticket to the playoffs. And that is what happened. Not the most exciting of games, a bit of a whimper in a big spot for Tom's team, 89-61. A large part of that, not fair to put it all on this, but Will Levis being the quarterback, because he had both Bo Nix and Jaden Daniels on the bye week, unfortunately timed bye week for him. But even beyond that, even if you had another 20 on that, he still doesn't win this game. Will Levis does get injured in that game, but as I say, it doesn't really make the difference here. And Coach Garner Beddoes makes his return to the playoffs, Chris.
Yes, indeed. Yeah, pulled out with an 88.61 win. I mean, Ollie's team across the course of the year has been weirdly scoreable. I don't know if that's because people have not scored against him. I guess we'll see that in a bit.
We will.
But at the same time, big up for Chuba Hubbard and this team. He's been the catalyst, I think, on skill positions, and you just look down his year. It looks like an RB1. It smells like an RB1. Therefore, it is an RB1. And 16.7 points again. Another really good score. But yeah, chipping in Pollard, Bates the kicker, did well. Jalen Hurts should do well and did. And some decent, high single digit numbers. Neighbours very close to miss out on a double digit point week, and obviously effectively carrying a player as well, where obviously on the bench there's really not a great deal else there. So yeah, it's one that I think Ollie can be really pleased with. As for Tom, it's obviously taking a few punts in this one. Clearly we will Levis at QB with his dodgy shoulder in quite obviously not quite a terrible game, in what was probably one of the worst games I've ever seen up until this week's Thursday Night Football, which was pretty bad. But scored 7 points, which from a QB not really expecting to want. And again, even if that had hit for an extra 20 points, it still wouldn't have made that much of a difference anyway. So a fat 0 from the defense. Obviously, we saw that on the bench as well. No matter what defense you play, still scoring 0.
Yeah.
The T. Higgins regeneration didn't work out in this one because Chase got all the points. And Amon Ra again, a quiet week fantasy wise for him, even in a big win. Travis Kelce had not been the points cow that we've seen in recent years. I think that position is a dead one. I'm glad we don't play a regular tight end every week, because that is so debilitating these days for any league that does. You look at the bench, some big numbers. Obviously, Rashad White
sort of benefit from Irving, obviously getting into the game.
Exactly, the big benefactor of that. So you can't take that into account. And Shakir as well, so streaky especially in a shootout. So yeah, nothing you can really do there for Tom. Yeah, goes out with a bit of a whimper, but better luck next year. And also, his record at 500 is one of his better for years. So we'll take that.
Yeah. When I was just updating the old career win losses and stuff, I was sort of somewhat surprised to see Tom actually has a sub 500 regular season record. I think actually it might even be slightly all time as well. And I was thinking, God, for a 2-time Corona Bowl win, you think Tom knows his stuff, but yeah, you're right. He has had some rough seasons over the years, as many of us have. But has a 500 year this year in a fairly good year. Just didn't quite all come together. For the Winchester Bowl series, though, you are gold are now 9-6 all time against Tom's Tyrants, and that brings us to our last game. So as we recap the last game, then, so what's the conditions? So as we said, Ben Necessity's already won the division. We now know Make Kitchens Great Again won their division, and the Dream Team obviously were there whenever the Bucking the Trend won their division. With Tom's Tyrants lost, that knocks them out of the wildcard race. So that leaves it between Pat and bucking the trend. Pat just needed to beat Ben to secure the wildcard ticket. If he lost, it came down to points with Mike, which we'll obviously see when we do the recaps and bits in a second. But the points did not matter because Pakistan coming up with a big W here. 4-game win streak to close the year to 117 to 114 against Iksan. Pat very much earning his ticket to the playoffs. Sandarnold having a bit of a point eruption there. It was a very interesting game overall because it was just fireworks everywhere in this game, Chris. So a very fitting game to end on. This, unfortunately for Mike, obviously does knock him out completely. And obviously you had the points forward wildcard set up as well. So Pat takes the final playoff spot.
Yes, absolutely. So no, I think Pat's team across, again, 9-5 record across the course of the year, always been punchy, always been decent. I think going into the playoffs, actually, it's really set up. And not only that, you look top to bottom in that team, and it's really strong.
Yeah.
Really strong. So let's go through it. So yeah, Darnold's been one of those. I mean, as a story, just in himself, what a turnaround, by the way. But, across the course of the season. He's been super consistent. I mean, a couple of down weeks here and there, but I'm seeing more high 20s and 30s in there than not. So fair play. And against that pretty weak Atlanta secondary as well, absolutely rips it apart for 44.5 points. But that's not where the story ends. Obviously, we see Lamb and Connor, A-Chan all chipping in. Thomas even in a 10-6 win would go for 86 yards, which is always a good sign. And the supporting cast coming up trumps. For Ben, again, really good point score, obviously 114.5. He'll feel gutted not to have won this, but I think across the course of his team, so there was enough there to win any other week. But you can't beat when someone scores 44 points on the other side. Then it's very difficult to compete with that. Though he did have 2 QB scores, of course. Puka went for nearly 30 and Baker again 25. But yes, this was a quiet week for Saquon at only 14.5. But fair play for Carry only, yeah. But fair play for persisting with Jerry Jeudy as well, because again, it's very difficult to replicate that. You look at his bench, for 19 points from the 49ers, he pushes this up a little bit too. But you look at the bench, there's no one there in their right mind, especially with the matchup included, you're probably going to do. But again, if this is the home run approach, I suppose. You play Westbrook Akine over Calvin Ridley, you either go for a big score or nothing at all, and that's kind of what happened there. Unfortunately, plays Calvin Ridley in a who has not been setting the world light, mind you. I agree, but you say as the bona fide number one, maybe you want it, but I say that hindsight is 20/20, and yeah, that gets you the 2 points that you need to be able to change the complexion of the league entirely. It didn't happen, and I think deservedly Pat rolls on because that team is extremely strong.
Yeah, absolutely. So that closes out the final of the regular season recaps of the year. So we'll do the around the league potentially for one last time. I don't know if this thing continues on the playoffs, but let's just see what chokes up this week anyway. So Ross's team beat their projected score 7 weeks in a row, so Ross had a nice little end of the year there. My team has also beaten its projected score 4 weeks in a row, very easy because it was continually projecting my team quite lowly, so it wasn't too difficult to do. Teams that had a top 3 scoring QB went undefeated in week 14, 3-0. Bucking the trend beat their projected score 3 weeks in a row. Their necessities obviously started the league's top scoring quarterback and also the top scoring tight end. George Kittle, who got the 15.1 last week as well. Teams won 58.1% of the time this season when they threw no interceptions in a week. Teams will also won 8% of the time when starting the league's top scoring QB of the week, 8-2 overall. Not surprising. And then Pat, as we said, 4-game winning streak, so some interesting additional stats for you there. We will now go on to the league news. So fortunately, nothing, as I said, has happened sort of within the last week. We're not going to go back too much more on that. But there are no recent injuries going into the playoffs, significant injuries anyway. So that's always nice for the playoff teams, as we don't have that sort of corrupting what's obviously been a good season of work. No real transactions of note at the moment either, though I will just point out a reminder, Freddie, please do not make ad drops. You are not in the playoffs. We are banned from making ad drops if we are not in the playoffs. So I don't think anybody particularly did want any of those, but if the playoff teams do want one of those guys, just say, because in fact, I'll probably just reverse those out just so they'll be out there for you guys again after we get off the pod here. In terms of standing sets and milestones, let's do that, because we've obviously got some fun stuff to go through here now. So Southampton division, as we say, Coach Gardner Beddoes wins this division at 9-5. Chris, you actually finished second in this one, because you obviously won. Getting into 7-7, you still obviously had the playoffs by way the points forward. 14-31, which was about 70 points, 75 points shy of my dad, but fairly heads and shoulders head and above anyone else. Tom Starr at 7-7, also obviously dropping down a spot there in the division with you winning, Chris, obviously the first pair of points, and then obviously me rounding out the bottom there at 3-11. We go to the Portsmouth division, 10-4 for the Dream Team, the regular season winner as well, so owner of the Nathwani rule once again. Pakistan 9-5, obviously as we know, sliding into that wildcard spot with the league best 4-game win streak at the moment. There's a couple of teams on 3, that's Viv and Coach Gardner Beddoes as well. So yeah, Pat gets the wild card over bucking the trend, who finished at 8-6. The only 8-6 team this year. Not often we have that. It's actually, we'll come back to the Winch division, but it's actually quite an interesting year this year compared to some previous year. But bucking the trend 8-6 there, and then rounding out Exxon at 6-8, not quite getting to 500 there. And then the Winchester division, obviously already locked up by Ben Estes, but they do finish with a 9-5 record and the highest scoring team, officially the 2nd seed, which means Coach Gardner Beddoes is officially the 3rd seed. As we know, come playoffs, those two will play each other, the 2nd and 3rd division leaders. So we've got a Bear Bowl to look forward to next week. Then we've got Ross's team at 6-8, as well as Great Scott. And then Oakland Golden Bears at 4-10, just avoiding last place, which is my team officially, obviously with one less win. Had I beat you, Chris, I would have avoided that just about, but say la vie. When we look in terms of the division winners, 9-5, 9-5, and 10-4, so actually a fairly strong year this year compared to last year. I think it was last year, maybe in the last couple of years. There was some ropey divisions and obviously some not great team, or not necessarily playoff worthy team ended up making it, but I think this year all 3 of the division winners certainly worthy of doing so. Wildcard as well set at 9-5. Again, it's quite often we see an 8-6 team get the wildcard, but again pitched quite highly at 9-5. There would have been a scenario, like I said, that Viv could have been 9-5 if Pat and Mike both won, that Viv would have missed the playoffs at 9-5, which has only ever happened once before, so Viv avoided that ignominy again. And then obviously your team at 7-7, Chris, you could have been the first team again. Had I got a couple more points, you could have been the first team with a losing record to actually make the playoffs. Which obviously the points forward wildcard there is there to correct, but you got 7-7 anyway, so that's all okay. We've obviously had a 7-7 playoff team there before as well. In terms of anything else to do with the standings, yeah, that's pretty much it. And I mean beyond Mike though, no other team getting to Tom Sorensen, obviously you, Chris, got 7-7 as well. But yeah, a bit more of a spread. Wasn't quite the closest of races going into the final week, but we did obviously have some drama in the playoff race at least. If we take a look, let's take a look at the points and stuff here as well. So as we know, Ben Estes is finishing as the highest scoring team with 15.06, pretty good score. You were obviously about 70 points off that, as I say, Chris, at 14.32. Then there's Pat Stan, who again sort of sits between you and gaggle of other teams with 13.83. Then from Mike at 13.34 down to let's do it down to Ross's team at 12.72. There's about 5 teams in that span, all with ranging scores there. The records of which though range from 6-8 to 10-4, and that's quite the gamut there. And then you've got mine, Ben, and Jeff's team in the lower, just beneath that, but still in the mid to lower 1200 range. So not really too far off a number of those teams there. Again, the records 3-11, 6-8 across our two, and then Freddie rounding out the bottom, who did finish quite significantly behind everybody else. He was in the lower sort of 1100s range. So if we take a look at the points against now, so Chris, you obviously deservedly making the playoffs with your points forward wildcard because you nearly got scored on as much as you scored, 1,400, the highest conceded team. Only just pipping Tom, who, he probably will feel a bit more hard done by. Whilst he wasn't quite at the races in terms of your points scored, he was obviously in the mix of a load of teams, but he did concede, quite a bit of points. Great Scott as well, 6 and 8, but the points forward were lower. Freddie Team, to his credit as well, we know the points forward are low, but he did get scored on quite a bit as well, in the mid-1300s, as did Ben. Mike, myself, we're all in sort of the mid-1300s range among the higher end of the points conceded. You get further down, Ross is at the lower end of the 1300s, and then there's 3 teams within the 1200 range. Coach Garden Betters obviously won his division, just under 1300. Viv, mid-1200s, 1250-ish, wins the division, and Ben Necessities, low 1200s, wins the division. Well, and then Pat, the wildcard team, the lowest of them all, decisively even beneath my dad's team, only 1,150 points conceded. Very much getting the benefit of that. Granted, the points forward are good as well, so it's not fair to put it all on that. But we know that the opposition and the points you concede can make all the difference, regardless of how good your team is. So, it's quite funny though that 4 of the 5 playoff teams all had the lowest conceded points. The only one that makes the playoffs, your team, Chris, with the highest. But obviously, in pretty much every other league out there, you would not have been a playoff team either. If we'd have extended the playoffs by a traditional wildcard spot to the 5th spot, that would have been Mike, who was in the middle of this range. So you would have had 5 of the 6, is that? No, 5 of the 7 bottom lowest conceded teams would have made the playoffs in that case. So it's a very justifiable playoff spot. I think that is what we're learning, Chris.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, it's really clear that that's the case, though, isn't it? Because if it's just on points against, that's the luck element of it, I suppose. Then you really would feel hard done by. But no, this is a different kind of league. That's why it's so successful. So yeah, all good.
Yeah, definitely. And to be fair, like with my dad's team, like no offense to Jeff, Freddie, and Ross, but obviously that was probably their easiest division to win this season. So it's not my dad's fault. He was in that division, and he obviously had the highest. He would have almost certainly made the he would have made the playoffs, regardless of what division he was in with that points forward, whether he had 0 wins or 14, because he would have at least got the points forward wildcard. So it's not completely fair to say it that way. We'll take a look at the breakdown then. So breakdown, and surprisingly, obviously my dad's team at the top, 105 and 49 across the year, the only team to have 100 wins in this metric, finishing off pretty strong. 3 out of 4 final weeks, 10 and 1 or better. Chris, you are unsurprisingly second here as well. Didn't mention in the recaps, obviously your team really did fly out of the gate. You've not necessarily been a world beater, I think it's fair to say, over the last month and a half, but your team is obviously still been very good, at least around 500, if not slightly better, so still good there. Pat Stan has been very good of the last 3 weeks of the season. You can see it did dip down a bit in there a few weeks before that, but has still been very good. And then the regular season winner, you're in the 90s, by the way, both of you. Viv, 85 and 69, again, pretty good. But obviously benefiting somewhat, you would say, being 4th in this metric, and obviously ending up with the best record and winning all. Mike's here, 173, obviously just missing out that 3 and 8 week to close the season, and it's again a point we didn't make in the recaps, but it really is a damn shame for Mike, because Mike has been on an absolute heater. It looked like he was sort of gonna get that playoff spot, and then you never know, could have potentially run the table, might have had to buy. He's had an 11-0, 10-1, 5-6, 11-0, 11-0 weeks entering in, so he has been an absolute heater in this. But yeah, obviously the final week unfortunately just completely cost him there. Tom Tyrus to go with their perfect 7-7 500 record. You're not going to leave this, Chris. 77 and 77 in the breakdown. The bang average squared epitome team, I think it's fair to say.
Epitome of that, wow.
And then we get into something that's a bit less good. So we've obviously had 4 of the 5 playoff teams we've mentioned here, and had Mike made the playoffs, could have potentially been 5 of the 5 being the top breakdown team, so that would have been justice, you would say. We have a division winner at 73 and 81, Coach Gardner Bellows. So yeah, very fortunate, some might say. to have won the division and got the playoffs by that regard. The team obviously isn't too bad, but wasn't one of the highest scoring ones. Obviously hasn't done so well on the breakdown, benefited from the points against too, so perhaps a bit more of a fortunate playoff berth for him. Even more so, my team's only just behind him at 71-83, and I have a 3-11 record. And to your point, Chris, as you say, second half of the season has been so bad. I only had 1 week in the last 6 weeks when my team was sub 500. So again, if I was supplanted into another division, shall we say, I think you can know which one I'm alluding to. If me and Ben essentially swapped, how different could it have possibly been? But that's the game, as we know. So then we've got Ross's team, Great Scott and Oakland Bears, all in the bottom here, 3 of the 4 Winchester Division teams. Ross's team on the same record as mine. For Oakland Bears, heads and shoulders beneath everybody else, 47 and 107. Next closest is Jeff at 64 and 90. So obviously Freddie's team, the only team to have over 100 losses in this. And then obviously Ben's team in the mix there as well, 66 and 88. So that's that. Looking at the coach rankings, Ross finishes at the top of this, but as we know, that's very much a lack of depth. But to be fair, only 80 points left on the bench to the entirety of the season, so pretty good. Viv, maximising the potential really, and Pat as well, obviously both playoff teams and my dad, all the second to fourth teams in this metric. With a bit over 100, and my dad's up to more towards the 150s. Then there's obviously a gaggle of teams kind of in the mid-100 range. We get to more the higher end. And we do see some teams here like Tom who potentially could have done a bit better, leaving 200 points on the bench. You could have squeezed even more out of the orange potentially. Chris, you had 177, but you're not significantly better or worse than anyone else, so I think that's unfair to levy. But we look at Coach Gardner-Bellows. I mean, the breakdown of the points forward isn't great. That's because there's a lot of points on the bench, 2 through 3. So again, maybe this team is a bit better than we think, but maybe the coaching is the issue of the team selection. And then Ben, as we know, 6 and 8 didn't make playoffs. 247 points left on the bench. So if Ben gets half of that back, does that potentially change the season? I suppose we'll never know, unless you want to go through it in detail, Ben. But obviously an awful lot of points left on the board there. So that's the shakedown there. If we go through the milestones and things now, just one sort of milestone to speak about in terms of win-loss records. Tom has now moved into 5th all-time in overall wins, so congrats to you. Tom, obviously not doing that in the final week of the season, but since we last had the podcast. And then we can look at some accolades, because we've obviously got playoff teams a burst and things now. So if we start with my dad, he's notched his 5th playoff appearance, first since 2015. It's been quite a while since Ben and Cecily's have obviously been in the playoffs there. What's interesting is every time my dad has made the playoffs, it's been by way of a division win. So keeping it that trend alive. Yeah, that's pretty great, isn't it? And he's notched also his 4th high scoring team, which I believe is a record now. Yeah, it was a 3-way tie. I think it was a 3-way tie until that point. Just looking at the inactive teams, it indeed was. So standalone, my dad now having 4 high scoring teams. Interestingly, only one of those years up until 2 of these years culminated in the years that he also made the playoffs and won the division, which seems pretty crazy, but that's why we have that new playoff spot. So a few more things on the mantelpiece for my dad. Coach Gardner-Bellows as well. They notched their 3rd playoff appearance. Back-to-back playoff appearances, in fact, much like my dad. Each time he's made the playoffs, he's done it by way of winning the division too. And that's now, I think, 3 out of the last 5? Yeah, that he's made the playoffs, so not a bad clip there for Coach Gardner-Bellows. Viv, he's now set this, I think, the standalone record. Again, it was a tie. Just checking the inactive teams. Yeah, it was a tie until now, but Viv now has the record for playoff appearances, 8 playoff appearances. Reminder, this is the league's 16th year, so Viv has been in the playoffs 50% of the time, basically. For his own personal career, it's actually better than 50% because Viv didn't join until 2011. So it's actually 8 of 14 seasons for Viv being in the playoffs, which seems pretty mad. And again, he has made the playoffs 3 out of the last 4 as well, 21, 23, and now 24, obviously, respectively. So yeah, not bad. Picking up his 2nd regular season championship as well. And his 6th division championship, which again, I believe is now a record. Because he stays ahead of my dad in that regard. And again, it's 3 out of 4 division wins for Viv as well. So yeah, very good clip there. And then we have you, Chris. You've notched your 6th playoff appearance. Your first playoff appearance is 2021 when you had 3 in a row. You've had a couple of years off, but now you're back at it. So what's that? Is that 4 of the last 6 playoff appearances for you now? Yeah, and I think if you extend it one more, I think it's 5 of the last 8. So not bad at all. And yep, that's that. And then Pat as well, he's notched his 5th playoff appearance, 3 of the last 4 also. So quite a few returning playoff teams here. It's 3rd division championship for Pat as well, first since 2017. So some cool stuff going on there, Chris. And then lastly, and then we'll get on to but it's fine because we've only got one preview today, so it doesn't matter. And we'll obviously come back and do the award nominees and stuff probably in a later episode, and some maybe more cover detailed season recaps of the teams that get knocked out for the playoffs in a later episode. But for today, we'll leave it at that. So, obviously, we don't have a league champion yet. The best weekly performance, which still could change in theory, but if we just go off the regular season, Jeff had 142 points in week 11 this year. Sadly, obviously, didn't make a difference for the playoffs or anything, but at least he has that nice trophy. Hopefully, he'll hold on to that through the course of the year. My dad obviously has the highest scoring singular player with Josh Allen there in week 14. That almost certainly will hold. It would be very surprising if that changed. And again, my dad having the highest scoring team as well for this season. In terms of the Superflex format, I believe that is the... What's that? I think that's the 4th highest score since we've had the Superflex format, because I think it came to force in 2019. It's the one of the 4 also only to go over the 1,500 point mark. So not the most amazing of seasons for my dad compared to some of the high scoring teams that we've had since we've had the Superflex, but still a very good season, no doubt there. And that's everything there. So yeah, lots of stuff to go through as it pertains to milestones and things.
Definitely, it's all going on.
Yeah, lots of statistics. Right, we will get on to debate corner now. So for that we need John. John, could you please usher us into the corner?
Order.
Thank you, John. He's just getting ready to go off to his Christmas party, I think. So, yes, very good. So for debate corner this week, Chris, we have playoff teams now. But my question to you, or the question for the debate today, is: which of the non-playoff teams would have won it all if they'd have made it?
None of them.
Brutal. I've got a logical answer for this.
None of them. None of them would be able to beat Ben Estes. Easy debate this week. None of them would ever be able to beat any of the teams. Well, it's not any of the teams in the playoffs, but yeah, there was a few that had a head of steam, as we've mentioned. But I think realistically, they're where they're meant to be for a reason.
Fine. I would actually say bucking the trend probably would have had a pretty good crack at winning it all if it had made, just because he's been on a heat of the team, shaping up pretty good. Not necessarily guaranteed would have done, but I think had bucking the trend made it, that would have been one of the things I said, yeah, I could see them winning it if they got to the playoffs. So. Yeah,
possibly. I mean, so they've turned it up for the last few weeks, but for me, Ben Estes are the absolute one of the best teams all round I've seen for some years.
Yeah.
And to beat that juggernaut of a team would be doing some serious damage this year if that was the case. But
sure.
I've seen stranger things happen. But that team has been knocking points left, right, and centre out for at least the last 6 weeks.
Yeah.
And more clearly because they're the highest scoring team in the league.
Yes.
By some distance.
Yes.
Excuse me.
It's alright. Yep, fair enough. We'll delay no further and let's get to it. So only the one game for us to preview this week. The 3 division winners obviously have their bye, which means we have a Wildcard Bowl between yourself and Pat Stan, Chris. So let's get the Monday Night Football music and get into the preview of said game. It's the Inter-Continental edition of the Wildcard Bowl. Pakistan takes on Forge Flyers, Pakistan being the traditional wildcard against the points forward wildcard. Forge Flyers, Pakistan 9-5 on a 4-game win streak. Forge Flyers with the win, doesn't matter though because they got the points, that's why they're in the playoffs with the 7-7 record. Pakistan though have the points in the projections, 92-90. Taking a look at the lineup, Sam Darnold remains as the starting quarterback for Pakistan. In terms of other roster changes, I'm not sure exactly. I think Pat could possibly be unchanged at the moment. He's going with the 30 personnel, 3 running backs, 2 wide receivers. On the other side for you, Chris Jordan Love in at quarterback. In terms of other changes, Zay Flowers comes obviously back from the bye, replacing Jacoby Myers. And I believe that is your only change at the moment as well. You're going with 21 personnel, 2 running backs, tight end, 2 receivers. The history of this matchup all time. Forge Flyers, you are 3-9 against Pakistan, so a bit of a bogey team in the playoffs here, but it doesn't matter, you got to throw out the baby in the bathwater when it comes to playoffs, because it's single elimination, as we know, when it'll go home. And what do you think of the Wildcard Bowl, Chris, being part of it yourself?
Yes, because one team's not come up against in this particular setting, it's Pat, because I don't do very well against Pat ever, and any of the times that we do have a game against each other, it's generally quite close, and we're talking like hair's breadth close. So yeah, it's going to be an interesting one, this. However, just by looking down the lineups, if I was Minnesota right now playing at home against Chicago, I'd feel as though that was that was a gift. I think that Darnold and Addison are going to do really well here. You see Lamb against Carolina again. I think that's going to be tougher for Dallas than might be expected, but again, I think that he's going to be a big part of that. There's a shootout on the cards between Detroit and Buffalo, and I think being in Detroit makes that much more spicy. James Conner is, as we've mentioned countless times in this pod, the most dependable running back, especially at home and especially against that New England team. Chan against Houston, I would feel good about. Chiefs versus Cleveland as well. Yes, Jameis is playing. Yes, what does Jameis do? Throws a lot of yards. That's good. What does he also do? Throw a lot of picks. I would expect to see some very high scoring players on Pat's team, and I think that if I would fully expect to see them do well here. For me, again, not as dominant as it has been over the last little while. I haven't scored over 100 in some weeks. I have question marks over Jordan Love this week against Seattle, who are a very decent defensive unit, especially at home. Chase and Flowers have matchups against poor teams, and I'm not sure that they will need to do an unbelievable amount to win against them. Kamara could be the only good part of that New Orleans offense right now, playing at home against Washington. Again, there's going to be a lot of volume, but how fit he is, we just don't know. Gibbs against Buffalo will be fine. Bowers against Atlanta should be fine, but he has Desmond Ridder throw into him, and again, I am not convinced. But I think if you're Desmond Ridder throw into a tight end like him, it's probably for the best. I like my matchup the Ravens do against the Giants. I think they're going to beat up Boswell against Philly. It's not very windy here on the East Coast, so thankfully.
Are you going to go out and throw a ball in a parking lot just to make sure?
Just to be certain, yeah, absolutely. I'm going to check. I was tempted to go up there, but it's just too far. But at 9:25 in the evening, or 4:25 our time. So yeah. But anyway, the fact of the matter is that Pat's had a strong team throughout the course of the year. I have had a strong team for only some of the year, and I think that there's definite top to bottom depth in both teams. But Pat has just the better matchups this week, in my opinion, and should comfortably win this one.
Are we gonna do locks? I know there's only one game this week. Are we gonna do? Up to you.
Yeah, let's do it. We can only get it wrong. So I'm gonna lock that, I'm afraid.
Yeah, as am I. I'm going to log Pat, but I'm only doing it because obviously we are, as we've just agreed, we are going to have to do a log because it's not a logged Pat. It's I'm going with Pat log. But I think it's going to be a competitive game. Yes, I do think Pat maybe has the slight edge, but for me, I think it could really all hinge on Jordan Love for you. I'm not sure really what to make of that going into Seattle. If Jordan Love has a good day, I firsthand obviously saw what Jamar Chase could do last week. So, you know, if Love has a good day and Chase obviously does chase things as normal as well, I think that probably sets you up very nicely. If Love doesn't have a good day, I think it's because I kind of look at Pat's team and it just seems to have that nice stable floor which you like to see in any fantasy team with the potential for the upside, but your team I think just has a bit of a wider range of outcomes. It feels like the upper end obviously being very much a part of that too, but obviously the lower end being there as well, and that's just sort of what feeds into the division. Kind of like you say, I think man for man, Pat probably has the slight edge just because I know Brock Bowers is an absolute revelation and a beast at the tight end position. But you sort of mentioned as well, Kamara, you know, what is that Saints offense at this point? We just really don't know. With Derek Carr not playing, as you say, he's going to have to be the offense, but, you know, that also means that any defense worth their salt are going to be absolutely trying to key on him and shut him down accordingly. So Flowers, we know he can be a bit hit or miss as well in a game against the Giants. It can go either way in those games. They either put up a bunch of the points as part of the points party, or they don't do a lot because they don't necessarily need him to. Ravens D as well. Again, it's one of those weird ones where they should absolutely be. I think it's Drew Lock starting this week, isn't it? Still, it's either him or DeVito. I don't know, but you know, it goes both ways. Yes, they might get up early, but then if they take the gas pedal off, and you're quite often seeing teams then, you know, beat up on secondary players coming in, and it's not great for fantasy. Or it could be very good and they just erase them all game. There's such a range of outcomes, I feel like, for your team. Whereas for Pat, it's steady. Maybe the upside isn't quite there as much, but it just seems it feels a bit more reliable. But it's going to be an extremely entertaining Wildcard Bowl. It's very nice. It's the only, obviously, other than the Corona Bowl itself, the only week where there's effectively an island game. Because no other, obviously, relevant games at least going on in here in week 15 in the LOC. So yeah, it's going to be fascinating to watch, and you get to watch it all completely in the country it's taking place, which is nice.
Yes, I do.
Yeah.
I am thrilled to be here, to be watching it this week. I have to say, of all the weeks to be here, it's a very good one.
Yeah, time very nice. You were there last week as well, right? Not that it mattered greatly as much because you'd already basically made players at this point. So.
No, I was here, but deeply jet lagged. So this is at least somewhere that I can go watch today without falling asleep on the bar. So that'd be good.
Good, very good. Good. Well, yeah, I'm sure we'll all be active on the WhatsApp group in the evening. That'll be a bit of fun as well as we all watch along. Darts starts tonight as well. Don't forget if that's your kind of thing. But
of course.
Yeah. You might struggle to see that out there, Chris. They like a bit of darts, but
yeah, they do. I say it's challenging, but yes. So I will be there for the games for certain.
Excellent. Yeah, good to hear it. Well, that brings us to the end of the LOC Report. As I say, hopefully we will now be doing episodes until the end of the season because, Chris, I believe you're back next at some point within the next week.
Yep.
I'm sure we'll be doing a pod, and then obviously at some point Christmas is timed quite nicely this year. That it's sort of around the weeks. Although saying that, there is a Christmas Day game which is on a Wednesday, so I'm not really sure how that's going to work league-wise, because obviously typically our waiver day is a Wednesday, and games are obviously done on by the Monday night, or obviously certainly by the Tuesday. So absolutely no idea how that's going to work. We'll find out, I suppose. But other than that, thank you for joining us, Chris.
Well, thank you very much. Yeah, I'm thrilled to be here, even though it is 20 to 10 in the morning. And I'll hopefully be back on the island next week.
Definitely, yeah. Well, have a great rest of your time, obviously, out in the US, and best of luck in the Wildcard Bowl as well. To everybody else in the UK, well, not strictly in the UK necessarily, but to everyone else watching, I hope you have a nice rest of your weekend. Best of luck in your matchup, unless you're playing me, of course, which you don't have to worry about, because I am done. But not in 2 other leagues, I'm not. Have a good one, everybody.